call this meeting to order, Tuesday, January 8th. I'll begin by introducing my colleagues, my board members. To my left, Vice Chair Francis Spivey Weber. To Fran's left, Board Member Felicia Marcus. To my right, Tam Doduk, and to Tam's right, Stephen Moore. Mr. Howard, your staff, please.
Yes, to my right, Chief Deputy Karen Turgovich. Chief Deputy John Bishop is ill today and won't be joining us. To my left, Michael Laufer, Chief Counsel, and we're assisted by the board today. The board is assisted today by Janine Townsend and Courtney Davis.
Very good. All of you know my favorite part of the board meeting is instructing you about the emergency evacuation, but it's important. If you do hear an alarm at the back of the room, there are 2 exit signs, a set of stairs, go down the stairs, and be thankful you escaped. I would also like to let you know this meeting is being webcast and recorded, so when you come to the podium, it's important that you identify yourself and whom it is you're representing. And most importantly to me, if you would turn off all of these electronic things that make irritating noises, I would appreciate it a great deal. With that, at each board meeting we have an opportunity for a public forum for a member of the public to come forward and rail on us about some issue that is not before the board. Do you have any cards, Ms. Townsend? Are there any of you that would like to speak in the public forum? Seeing none.
Oh, no, there's a hand. Sorry, the card. Got here a little late.
If you would, when you get done, if you would let Ms. Townsend have a blue card so we know who you are. So if you're mean to us, we can send you threatening letters and stuff.
I'll be nice, I promise. My name is Lisa Nicodemus, and I'm with Apex Envirotech. We're a small environmental consulting company based in Gold River. And I've been asked to be here today by the owners of our company and a few other environmental consulting companies just to bring to the attention of the Water Board the fact that it is taking approximately 7 to 8 months for the underground storage tank cleanup fund to process reimbursement requests that are being submitted to their offices. And as you can imagine, that's catastrophic to our cash flow and is detrimental to the progress of cleaning up the sites that we're trying to clean up. And the Health and Safety Code, section 25299.57, states that to the extent funding is available, the board shall pay within 60 days.
This is something that's going to be on our board agenda in a little bit.
Great. Is it?
Oh,
that would be great if it is.
Excuse me. I've been corrected. If you'd go ahead, we'd appreciate it.
It's very short, so I won't be very long. The board shall pay within 60 days from the date of receipt of an invoice of expenditures all costs specified in the work plan developed pursuant to section 25296.10. So I'm just here to ask the board to investigate why it is taking the Division of Financial Assistance over 7 months to review and process reimbursement requests, and respectfully ask you to direct that changes be made immediately to allow for payment of submitted costs within 60 days as required by the State of California Health and Safety Code. And I appreciate your time.
I think Ms. Doduk can respond to your question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. I am aware of those concerns, and I didn't have a meeting last week with a consultant and others discussing this issue. In that meeting was also our Deputy Director, Liz Haven, who is sitting right there. And if you would also give her your contact information, she'll be happy to be in touch with you. We did have a very lengthy discussion, which I won't go into detail now, but we also identified, I think, some good ideas for follow-up on to improve in that area. So Liz will be happy to discuss it with you, and we will definitely take a look at where things can be improved in terms of that response time, recognizing, of course, that we all have scarce resources and that a lot of Liz's resources have been diverted to implementation of the low-threat closure policy that that the board recently adopted. Right. But your points are well made, and Liz,
and I know that
do be in touch with her.
But we just wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of the problem. So I appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you. Over here?
Over there, and then perhaps Liz can follow up with you as well.
Thank you for taking the opportunity to come up. We appreciate it. Ms. Townsend, I understand we're going to talk about the December 4th board meeting. I don't know, maybe my colleagues have some corrections or modifications. I have a hard time imagining you made a mistake with it. But that's what you tell me. You never make a mistake. I'll move that we approve the minutes of the December 4th, 2012 board meeting.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Do any of my colleagues have anything they would like to report?
If I may make one mention.
You're not going to tell us about taking your aunt to Las Vegas, are you?
No.
Good.
No. I really should not have told you that. I knew it would come back to haunt me. In December, I had the opportunity to attend the Central Valley Regional Water Board meeting, and on their agenda was, a minor issue regarding the ag waiver for the East San Joaquin folks, coalition. And I made a comment afterwards to Chair Longley, which I want to repeat publicly here, that I thought it was one of the best example of a public discussion that I've ever attended. Obviously, knowing the controversial nature of that item, the complexity of the issues involved, the fact that there were multiple speakers with different viewpoints and different suggestions. The chairman, the staff, assisted by Lori Oken, our assistant chief counsel, did a great job in discussing, addressing, and so clearly, I think, communicating and representing this public process that we're all involved in. And so I was, extremely impressed with the way that the meeting was conducted, managed, regardless of the fact that obviously not everyone liked the outcome. I think everyone appreciated the way in which the discussion was held and the way in which the meeting was managed. So that was one thing. And the other thing is mainly for staff, but specifically I think for Karen, in working with Eric and ARP on our groundwater strategic work plan. One of the things that came up in this item, and I won't go into detail, Michael's looking at me in case there is petition before us, but the item, an issue came up with respect to the anti-degradation analysis and the baseline for the anti-degradation analysis. And this was not the first time I've heard this topic. And the issue of how the anti-degradation policy apply or does not apply to groundwater and how it's being implemented with respect to our groundwater issues. So as staff put together your proposed or draft groundwater strategic work plan, I would encourage you to, if you haven't already, also look at potentially the action of developing guidance or something with respect to implementation of the anti-degradation policy as applied to groundwater.
Thank you very much. I actually met with Pamela Creedon at the end of last week, and one of the items that we discussed was putting an update of the guidance to address groundwater on our policies and permits action list. So we'll be talking about that at one of our upcoming MCC meetings.
And the only other add-on I'll have to that, Karen, is, and I'll leave it to staff to work out, but think about whether it's possible to pull together a small stakeholder group, given how passionate people are about this topic, to see if there's a potential to come together on some of their thinking with respect to groundwater and anti-degradation. Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. Any others? Mr. Howard, would you introduce item number 3, please?
Item number 3 is an information item on statewide sanitary sewer overflow reduction program. About 4 years ago, the board
Australia is, of course, the world.
issued WDRs for this program, and we've been doing annual updates since then on how it's been going. We have Victor Lopez doing the presentation.
You two not getting along, or? We have a counseling program available if we have.
You should be able to.
You guys get comfortable though. We've got plenty of time.
But you notice how they ignored you, but listen to Janine.
That's smart. They know the real chain of command around here. Sorry about that, Victor. I have to amuse myself every once in a while.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good morning, Chair Hoppen, members of the board. My name is Victor Lopez. I'm a staff engineer with the Division of Water Quality, and I'm here to present an annual update to the SSO reduction program. So first, I'm going to start with a quick overview of my presentation. I'm going to go over some of the basic requirements of the sanitary sewer systems, waste discharge requirements, and then I'm going to move on to spill and data trends we have identified in the database. I'm going to move on to participation compliance, and I'm going to finish with compliance and enforcement activities we have taken under this program. So first, a quick overview of the basic requirements. This general WDR applies to publicly owned sanitary sewer systems over 1 mile in pipe length. And we currently have around 1,100 enrollees. And enrollees are required to report spills upstream of their wastewater treatment plant headworks. Wastewater treatment plant and combined sewer system overflows are not regulated under this order. Additionally, private lateral sewage discharges are not regulated. However, we encourage enrollees to report them when they become aware of them. Additionally, the WDR requires enrollees to develop a sewer system management plan, which is used to manage their sewer system more effectively. And in addition to the WDR, the San Diego Regional Water Board has additional requirements. So now I'm going to move on to some of the data and trends we have identified. Out of the total number of enrollees, we have 72% that have reported at least one SSO to the database, and the remaining 28% have never reported an SSO. Since the inception of the program, the database has around 29,000 SSOs reported, and around 14% of those have reached surface waters. In terms of the volume spilled, around 128 million gallons of raw sewage have been spilled, and around 81% of that volume reached surface waters. We have also identified that around 5% of the enrolled sanitary sewer systems are responsible for 90% of the volume spilled in the state. Important to mention is that around 45 of those 57 have received some type of enforcement action, either from the state water board or the regional boards, and 12 of them have been inspected.
Can I interrupt you for a minute there,
Yeah.
Victor? On the 5% that are causing 90% of the total spills, is there any way to analyze whether it's flaws in the original design of the system, whether it's negligent operation, a combination of both? It seems like it's a rather high number of the spills, or possibly some geographic consideration where they get extra normal amounts of rain. Is there a way you can pick out why 5% is causing that percentage of spills?
We collect the causes of the SSOs, so we can do an analysis of what are the main causes of those high volumes.
I think it'd be interesting, quite frankly.
Okay. So moving on, some trends and spill characteristics that remain unchanged from previous reports are that 91% of the SSOs are less than 1,000 gallons, and the leading causes are operational related issues such as roots, fog, and debris. And they account to around 2% of the volume spilled in the state. The remaining 9% of the SSOs are greater than 1,000 gallons, and the leading causes are capacity issues and structural issues. And they account to 98% of the volume spilled. Moving on, this chart shows the monthly trend in the number of SSOs. The upper line shows the total number of SSOs reported to the database, and the lower line is a subset of those SSOs for those SSOs that reach surface waters. And generally speaking, we're seeing a decrease in the number of SSOs reported to the database for all SSOs and for those reaching surface waters as well. We are also noticing correlation to the magnitude of precipitation we get during the year, and as you can see from those seasonal peaks.
Yeah, or could I just make a comment? comment, maybe for my fellow board members too, since I've worked in this area, as a sewer engineer myself. I would note, if you look at the peaks, the January '08 peak is interesting because we're talking about number of sanitary sewer overflows, not the volume of it. And I think it's a key distinction you've made in your report, is that the volume is overwhelmingly dominated by a few events. And then you'll see the January '08 peak is an example of that, where throughout the state, because of the precipitation, there was, it affected a lot of jurisdictions. So it wasn't necessarily one. But one thing to build on Charlie's question, if you look at that table that you've put together with certain agencies that have had events with large volume, such as the city of Richmond at the top, they kind of skew the volume issue, so that a big spill, if you cumulatively add the volume of spills, can dominate the analysis. Whereas the number of spills seems to indicate more maybe what Charlie was talking about some kind of operational issue. So I would just point out that it's an interesting dynamic with these data, that the volume versus the number of spills don't really mesh. They're kind of two different issues, so we have to be mindful of. All right, thank you.
So moving on to the next chart, this shows the same data on a fiscal year basis, and as you can see, the decreasing trend is more notable in this chart. Now I'm going to move on to the monthly trend in volume of SSOs and on a monthly basis, and we correlated this data with precipitation data we obtained from the Department of Water Resources. And precipitation is shown on the right-hand side in inches, and the volume is shown in millions of gallons on the left-hand side. And as you can see, there is a notable correlation between the magnitude of precipitation we get during the year, the wet season, and the high volumes of SSOs, which could be an indicative of issues with I&I and some potential structural issues. So moving on, this chart shows the same data on a fiscal year basis, and as you can see, for the fiscal year 2010-2011, we had a weather than normal year with 135% of normal precipitation for that year, in comparison to last fiscal year, which we got around 77% of precipitation of normal. So moving on to what is causing the high number of SSOs, as I mentioned previously, operational related issues are responsible for the high number of SSOs. And in terms of the high volumes, we've noted in the data that structural and capacity issues are driving the high volumes of SSOs.
Could I ask a question just as far as when we look at issues like debris and fog in the sewer, and or that we have a category of cause, are the dischargers afforded the opportunity to explain whether they believe the damage is caused by others? And I bring that up because sometimes these debris cause spills are a result of a plumber who sent something down from a lateral, or another utility directionally drilling into the sewer. One case I was part of was a guardrail contractor punched guardrail posts into a force main, and so with these the chaos of everyday life out there, is there a way for us to tease apart the causes clearly beyond the control of the discharger?
We have an option in the spill report where the user can select that if the spill was caused by vandalism, and also we have a description option right below that option. That gives enrollees an option to enter descriptions other than what is available in the selections.
So it's more of a narrative. We don't necessarily put it in our pies and graphs, but there in the data itself, there's
It's
a
under other. As you can see, that includes vandalism, surcharge, operator error, and unknown causes.
You think if a utility directionally drills into a sewer, it's vandalism? I mean, you know, the vandalism thing I'm struggling with a little bit because I'm not familiar with clear cases. You know, I guess they happen. Yeah.
Traffic cones in the manholes is a common one for vandalism, or rocks and stuff like that.
Let me build upon Steve's question, a follow-up to that. I mean, obviously, there are things here that are outside of the treatment plan's control. I guess the flip question to that is, how many of these conditions and structural causes are within our control in terms of what we might require or the conditions that we may impose in the SSO-WDR? Have you had a chance to look at and analyze the information from that aspect?
Yeah, a lot of our biggest cases, I'll mention East Bay Mud, consent decree that's going on right now as a result of EPA and NGO lawsuit. Those specific enforcement actions are requiring addressing infrastructure and updating infrastructure as well as upsizing as required. So to a large degree, it's left to the enrollee to determine how to solve the problem. And, you know, we're sitting there with EPA and the NGOs looking at time scales and what they're proposing to do and analyzing whether we think that's appropriate and will solve the problem. Short of that, you know, audits, on-site inspections, boots on the ground to ensure that the enrollees are implementing their developed SSMPs according to the plan that they laid out is our only other real mechanism outside of an enforcement action, I think, to really address, you know, whether they're upgrading and putting in a sufficient amount of money into maintaining their systems and as time goes on, so, and properly funding those systems. So it's really boots on the ground, and I think that gets us there outside of some kind of enforcement action. So
has the plan started to include sea level rise?
We are not requiring that in the SSMPs, but it is coming around through the MPDS program. I've looked at it working with Phil Iserina and Division of Water Quality and proposals to start putting that kind of mitigation and adaptation measures into the MPDS permits, but it hasn't made it around to the sanitary sewer systems, WDRs, at this point, so it's not a requirement in there.
Because it will exacerbate the problem.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, one question, since we're doing a little Q&A here. One of the data points you have is 28% of the enrollees, and we're talking over 1,000 enrollees throughout the state. 28% have never reported a spill. Anecdotally, do you think these tend to be newer collection systems, or is there is it all over the map?
It's a combination of small and medium collection systems. The fact that they're not reporting SSOs doesn't mean that they're not complying with the monthly reporting and completing their SSMP and questionnaire. And we did an analysis of those in the report as well.
Because that will be, you know, there's two sides of that. They're doing a great job, or they may not be fully divulging all the information.
Yeah, I think based on, you know, the audits that have been done on site, Office of Enforcement did pick some of those out to go look at, and in some cases they found that they were doing as good as they claim. In other cases they did find underreporting and misreporting, so I think we got a mixed bag there, and again, boots on the ground's gonna suss out, you know, what the issues are. So
I'm going to move on to the next slide. And I'm going to go over some regional spill data and trends that we identified in the database. And in terms of the regions that are experiencing the highest number of SSOs, we see that the Sacramento, Central Valley region, San Francisco Bay, and Los Angeles waterborne regions are experiencing those high numbers of SSOs. It's important to note that these three regions combined account for more than 50% of the sanitary sewer system piping in the state. And also they are more heavily populated than other regions. In terms of the volume spilled in the state, the San Francisco Bay and San Diego regions are experiencing the highest volumes of SSOs, which could be an indicative of issues with I&I and correlated to the amount of precipitation we get during the wet season, in addition to structural issues. This is a graphical representation of the number of SSOs by region, and as you can see, the Sacramento Valley, Central Valley, excuse me, San Francisco Bay, and Los Angeles are leading, are experiencing the highest number of SSOs.
In terms of, I mean, this is, you know, impressive that there are two big standouts. But in terms of water quality, stream water quality, is this a 1% problem, a 10% problem, a 50% problem? I mean, is, you know, in terms of trying to prioritize what kind of investment you make to solve this problem, how big is it to the stream?
Most of the, as I mentioned before, a lot of these, the high number of SSOs are driven by smaller, less than 1,000 gallon spills. 91% are less than 1,000 gallons. Is there anything else?
Yeah, so we're talking about numbers here. We'll have a slide on volume, so I think that speaks more directly to water quality impact. But, you know, San Francisco Bay, Central Valley, Sacramento have some of our more, you know, sensitive waters in the state versus, say, the Santa Ana region, where a lot of these spills are going to dry channels that may not have water in them, but for a short period of time every year. So, relatively speaking, you know, spills in these regions are, you know, I think pretty high priority just due to the nature of the surface waters that are present and the abundance of surface waters. So.
Do you have a breakdown of that 9% that are big in terms of which facilities they are? I mean, do you have a list of 20 facilities that are the problem that we can look at then to see what the impact is? Or is that later in the...
Yeah, actually, we don't present that in the slideshow, but in our annual report at the very end, there's the top 20 spillers. And we've been ranking those for the last 3 years. So you can track and see which facilities. And we got a number of occupants of that list that have been there for the past 3 years.
So we can pick the right targets for enforcement and all, or help.
That is correct. And Victor and I developed a ranking tool actually that considers spill number, spill volume, as well as participation compliance in the program, i.e. how well have they reported, have they done their SSMP, you know, how well have they participated.
Yeah.
We lumped that all into a ranking model and ranked all agencies from high to low, considering all those factors, and provide that tool and the list to Office of Enforcement to help guide their actions. So that's what we're doing with respect to that.
That's good. You know, it's on this line of questions. You know, I agree with your general statement that the volume's probably more environmentally relevant than the number of SSOs. But wouldn't you say, or what do you think about, and have you had a chance to analyze some of the dry weather versus wet weather volumes? And maybe in your example of Southern California, where there's a dry channel, that may not have beneficial use impacts as much as maybe an intermittent or perennial stream in the Southern California in the dry weather, which I think would be your highest example of impact? I mean, have we drilled into the data that much, and would you agree with my statement?
Yeah, I agree with the statement. We've drilled around the edges of that, so we haven't gone that deep, I think, into to partitioning those out. So.
The next slide is going to show the SSO in terms of SSO rates in terms of SSOs per 100 miles of pipe per year. And the red line is the statewide average. And as you can see, San Francisco Bay and Central Valley, Sacramento are above the statewide average. In terms of the volume spilled, again, the San Francisco Bay and San Diego regions are experiencing the highest volumes of SSOs. And as board member Moore mentioned before, one or two enrollees might be skewing the data there. This chart shows the SSO volume rate in terms of gallons spilled per 100 miles per year, and the red line again is the statewide average, and again the San Francisco Bay region and San Diego are above the average.
Can I just forgive me if this is what does the San Francisco Regional Board think about this?
Can you repeat that again?
What does the San Francisco Regional Board say about this? Yeah, it's on. I'm sorry, I'm not close. I'm just curious as to what the regional board says about this. Since San Francisco prides itself on being
conducting
different than this.
inspections, and they're actually increasing their enforcement actions under this program. And as I mentioned before, regarding those 57 enrollees that are responsible for 90% of the volume spilled, a lot of those enforcement actions came from Region 2.
Yeah, and all. Yeah.
I'm just pointing out the dichotomy between the myth and reality, that's all.
Just to add to that, as I mentioned, there's a consent decree going on with the East Bay Mud, and that involves about 10 East Bay communities, including Oakland, Berkeley, and some of the bigger discharges there on the East Bay, where we've had most of the problems, I think, in terms of spillage. So,
and I think we talked about this. So is part of this that East Bay Mud actually did something ahead of the curve 20 years ago, and now they're trying to catch up with the formal regulations, right?
No, they've historically had a problem. The suit was brought by the NGOs and EPA, and then we came on into it, and I don't think that resulted as a fallout of this order per se, but just the endemic problems they've had with wet weather overflows. So.
Right, but no, in the 90s they actually were doing something that was ahead of the curve. And so the question is just, but it may not be what's adequate today.
Yeah, that ground over there is a lot of bay muds,
Yeah.
a lot of old pipe, earthquake prone, so there's a lot of leakage, a lot of I&I, a lot of old development, so.
Well, that's helpful, thanks.
Yeah, and slope, slope's a big issue.
And Felicia, I will be at the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Board meeting tomorrow. I'll try to find a diplomatic way to bring this up. Yes.
So I'm going to move on with my presentation. I'm going to go over the current compliance under the program. And this chart shows the yearly compliance for the SSMP. And for the last year, we achieved, and the enrollees, 90% compliance with this requirement. And that was a 20% increase from the previous report. We attribute the 20% increase to two notices of violation that we sent on July 2010 and April of 2012. In addition, we're sending an automated email reminder on a monthly basis, which reminds enrollees if that there's missing elements of their SSMP without certifying. Enrollees are also required to complete a questionnaire on with respect to their sanitary sewer system, and in terms of the compliance, we remain at 94%, which is similar to the previous annual report. Enrollees are required to report all SSOs, and in the case in which they don't have an SSO for a particular month, they are still required to submit no spill certification into the database. And this chart shows that monthly compliance. And for the last fiscal year, there was 93% compliance from the enrollees. And also, as you can see, from 2010 on, we see a steady increase of compliance in the monthly reporting. And again, we attribute this to those two notices of violation that we sent, and that email reminder that is sent on a monthly basis. And also, that email reminder has been received quite well by the enrollees, which are appreciative of that reminder that they received. So moving on to compliance and enforcement activities we have taken under this program. As I mentioned before, we sent 119 notices of violation to non-participating enrollees in July 2010, and 85% of those enrollees returned to compliance. And the remaining 15%, around 20 enrollees, were referred to the Office of Enforcement for further enforcement action. And out of those 20, 9 of them were small and disadvantaged communities, and 13 were municipalities. The rest were parks, correction facilities, and schools. Also, we sent 148 notices of violation to agencies that failed to complete their SSMP elements on time, and we sent those NOVs on April of last year. 90% of those enrollees that received that NOV have completed all of their SSMP or are in the process of completing their SSMP. They contact us and submitted a time schedule on with estimated completion dates. In addition, we're sending those email reminders, which we develop with help of our programmers. And again, those are sent on a monthly basis, and they identify issues within the database. For instance, if there's a spill report that hasn't been certified in the database, we send an email reminder to the enrollee, reminding them that they need to certify that specific spill. Moving on, the regional boards have taken 214 enforcement actions regarding the program since January 2011, and 174 were taken during the last fiscal year.
And you said most of those are in Region 2. What about Region 9?
Region 2, Region 9, and Region 5S in Sacramento.
Okay.
Those are the ones that have most. Moving on, our Office of Enforcement has been actively conducting inspections and audits. They have conducted 50 inspections and 50 records audits since inception of the program. And for the last fiscal year, they conducted 21 inspections and 50 records audits.
Before you move on, the first bullet there, or at least second bullet, for those that did not return to compliance, even after receiving the NOVs, the non-participating enrollees, what are we doing to address those that did not enroll?
They were referred to the Office of Enforcement for further action, and they're...
And you're on top of it, Chris? Yes. All right. Thank you.
So moving on, regarding the review and update of this general WDR. Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to report, too, that we've been engaged with, I'm Chris Kerrigan, the Director of the Office of Enforcement, and there was an inquiry earlier from Ms. Marcus about Region 2, and the Special Investigation Unit has been engaged with Region 2, and we've been looking very closely at several facilities there working with them directly on some enforcement and compliance issues. So Region 2 is aware of the issue, and we are engaged with them.
Thank you, Chris, for saving me from having to inquire about that tomorrow.
Moving on to the review and update of this general WDR. As you may remember, we had a public workshop on January 24th of last year, and we were directed to only amend the accompanying MRP to the WDR. We held 2 public workshops in Southern and Northern California to receive oral comments on the MRP. And we're expecting to reissue the MRP sometime this month or the following. And that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll take any.
Victor, you and Russell, I have a comment to make. I shouldn't admit this, but occasionally we sit up here and listen to reports that have a lot of graphs and charts on them, and I nearly go to sleep. But I think you can tell from the responses of my colleagues that what you presented to us had useful information in it. I appreciate the way you did it. I'm sure when you were putting it together, you thought, is somebody going to really look at this? I think it should be clear to you that, you know, we have, and I want to compliment both of you on that. So thank you.
And I will also second Charlie's comment, but also because I see Rafa in the room, I will remind, not that you need reminders, Karen, but when I was briefed on this item, I had asked that a report card be established for this program in our performance report, and I look forward to seeing that. I think this is definitely one of our success stories, shall we say, and I think it behooves us to keep tracking the progress and the results from this program.
I'd just like to ask one detailed question and then also second the comments of my fellow board members. Early in the report, you talked about how we just have the reporting program and it's based on spills from collection systems more, not treatment plants. But when I was in a former life on the regional water board in San Francisco Bay, that issue came up. And it's interesting because if you look at the way the sewer system's operated, you could install a lot of pumps in the collection system to bring down your SSO rate in the upper system and then force the spills to happen at the treatment plant under high weather conditions. You know, that's a management call. You would have less spills but higher volume, and treatment plants tend to be close to surface waters, and so you'd have more of an environmental threat. So this is a subtlety, you know, that we were weighing. So my question really is, you know, are we looking at treatment plant overflows or could you explain to the board how the reporting of treatment plant overflows is handled? Because I know we've taken enforcement actions at the San Francisco region on this issue, but could you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, spills from POTWs are covered under the MPDS permit in terms of reporting requirements. So those are reported on the DMR or SMR at the end of the month for the treatment plant. And I don't think there's really any teeth other than thou shalt report those spills, and then if the boards decide to pursue follow-up enforcement action under water code provisions, then that's how those are approached. And we, in this program, have been approached primarily by like the baykeepers and such as that to see if we can pull in those wastewater treatment plant spills as well as the permitted combined sewer overflows, which we only have 2 of those systems in the state, here in Sacramento and then San Francisco. But the concern is that folks who want to go out and kayak or swim in the bay, for instance, or in the Sacramento River downstream of Sacramento's combined outfall, they want to know whether it's safe to swim. And they look to our database, our data collection program. It's a little stale, granted, that, you know, they don't have to enter reports for 3 to 15 days, but the public has an easy hands on what went into that waterway, you know, where it went in. They don't have an analogous system for those sewage treatment plant spills or the permanent combined sewer overflows. All those are reported at the end of the month, so the data is very stale. So we've been approached to see if we can, you know, to inquire whether the boards have a system similar to that for those type of spills. And we've also worked with the legislature in the past on some attempts to develop a similar reporting system, but those have fallen, you know, fallen off the radar basically after a little bit of effort. So I think now that we got the database system, it could be cloned to handle reporting of those spills on a more timely basis.
Yeah.
I will note that per the Water Code and Health and Safety Code, when an agency does spill raw sewage, they are required to call CalEMA.
Right.
CalEMA puts the spills in the RIMS database, which is publicly accessible. So part of our effort, you know, as we're approached by water users and folks concerned about, you know, getting into the water basically around these outfalls, is, you know, educating them that they can go to RIMS and they can get more timely data. So the reporting requirement to CalEMA is within 2 hours of the, or I believe 2 or 24 hours.
Yeah.
Under our WDR, it's 2 hours. I think the statutory requirement under CalEMA is 24, so for spill.
Well, this is good. I think what this highlights is it's a real opportunity to augment the program we've already set up as far as data tracking on collection system overflows. It should be augmented, I believe, to include the treatment plant overflow, so it's all in one location. You know, and if my fellow board members agree, you know, I'd say that'd be a direction for the future, not, you know, tomorrow, but this is where we need to go. Because it's sort of, these shouldn't be treated as apples and oranges. Okay, that's really good. Yeah, and then just let me say and give you another positive feedback. In my experience in working in this program in the regulated community, I observed a cultural shift in the state of California, at least in the San Francisco Bay region for sure. You know, the agencies are owning the issue and that wasn't the case in 2004, 2005. You know, so I can speak as a witness to the change in the culture of, and it's not to say there wasn't a stewardship there in the first place, but, you know, there's been a real evolution, and I think the program is successful in numbers, as my fellow board members point out, but I think it's been successful in a deeper way, that people are learning about how important the issue is in the public, and the agencies that are stewards are owning the responsibility and living up to it, and I think the numbers are starting to show that. So I think it's a really important program. Thanks very much.
Mr. Howard, would you introduce item number 4, please?
Yes, one last comment on that last item. The program is recommending that we change the monitoring and reporting program for the sanitary sewer WDR, and we are sending out, either already have or will be in the next week or so, proposed change in the monitoring that's associated with the WDR. I'm delegated to approve that, so we'll see what the comments are, and I'll talk with the board members about where to go from there. The next item is update on actions to approve administration of the UST Cleanup Fund and UST Cleanup programs. We've been doing this update, I think, ever since we did our audit several years ago of the program, and Liz Haven will be presenting this item, I believe.
Good morning, board members. I'm Liz Haven, Division Chief of the Division of Financial Assistance, and I have with me Chris Kerrigan of the Office of Enforcement, Lisa Babcock, the Underground Storage Tank Fund Manager, and Kevin Graves, the UST Program Manager. We're going to do something a little different this time with this update. I'll be giving a PowerPoint presentation on the perspective of USTs with respect to groundwater contamination within the state. And I also want to mention that the Cleanup Fund now has a quarterly report that has some of the facts and figures that we used to report verbally at these 6-month updates. And that quarterly report is now posted for the last fiscal year with updates coming for the current fiscal year. And there'll be a link to it both at the end of my PowerPoint, but also in the executive director's report for the next board meeting. And so we are going to have Chris Kerrigan give you an update on the Office of Enforcement's recent activities, and then I'll follow with the PowerPoint.
Good morning, Chair Hoppen and honorable board members. I'm Chris Kerrigan, Director of the Office of Enforcement. A quick update on the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Prevention Unit's efforts with respect to the UST fund. This last month, we settled a matter for $75,000 against E2C remediation for some improper claims for reimbursement. As you may recall, that was the first case that came forward a few years back, and those matters were settled for some minor claims, but nevertheless improper claims made by E2C. So moving forward, still looking at that contractor or consultant. Also, you may recall the Hayden Environmental, Inc. case where a criminal complaint was filed by the Attorney General's office this fall against Kurt Hayden and Hayden Environmental, Inc. There is a trial-setting conference in that matter this month, and the criminal trial will proceed unless we're able to settle that case in the meantime. So always a positive development is the setting of a trial date. Everyone sort of gets real when the trial date is set. So looking forward to some discussions with that entity and a trial date getting set if we're not able to resolve our issues with that party. Then also in November and then again in December, as a result of the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Prevention Unit's investigations in-house, we referred 2 cases to the AG's office wherein search warrants were executed against Amiadini Associates and PW Environmental, 2 other consulting firms, where records were seized, including electronic records this time for the first time in one of our cases. So we'll be in the process with the AG's office of assessing the documents and records that we obtained in those 2 warrant actions and determining how to proceed civilly and or criminally in the near term. Also, if the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Prevention Unit is winding up its investigation of another consultant, I've read the preliminary assessment, and we will be referring that case to the Attorney General's office in the next few weeks. And I wanted to say that in sort of concluding or winding up, that the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Prevention Unit is now investigating several other additional consultants and contractors who make claims through the property owners for reimbursement from the fund. And we've seen a very substantial uptick in complaints from the public and claimants since the Hayden Environmental, Inc. case was filed, and we've been making it known that we are investigating. So we have a lot to do and a lot to look into in the near term with respect to following up on those complaints. Thank you.
Do you want to mention that there will be something prominent on the website?
Oh, yes. I'll let Liz speak to that.